Order, please. I'd like to call the Law Amendments Committee to order. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Legislative Assembly. This morning, we will be dealing with 4 bills, Bill number 241, 242, 243, and 246. And before I get going any further, I'd like my colleagues at the table to introduce themselves. My name is Keith Irving. I'm the MLA for Kings South and the Vice Chair of the Law Amendments Committee. So perhaps we can start with Mr. Burrell.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Gary Burrell, the MLA for Halifax-Chebucto.
Good morning. I'm Lisa Roberts, MLA for Halifax-Needham.
Morning. John Lohr, MLA for Kings North.
Good morning. My name is Tim Houston. I'm the MLA for Pictou East.
Good morning. Kelly Regan. I'm the MLA for Bedford.
Good morning. MLA Tony Ince, MLA for Cole Harbour, Portland Valley.
Margaret Miller, MLA for Hands East.
I'm Ben Jessam. I represent Hammonds Plains, Lucasville.
Thank you. So I'll just run through a few of the housekeeping items before we get underway. Please remember to turn your cell phones to mute or vibrate. There we go. As well, washrooms are just down the 2 sets of stairs, and make a left at the base of the stairs. The public washrooms can be found there. In the event of an emergency, please exit to Granville Street, and we'll gather at Parade Square. The rules of the House mean that what goes on in this chamber follows the rules of our main chamber. So that means no pictures by anybody except accredited media. And we respectfully request that any reactions from the gallery be withheld in terms of approval or disapproval of any of the conversations we're having here in this meeting. So I'm also joined by Alleged Counsel Gordon Hebb and Karen Kinsley, who will assist the committee during deliberations this morning. I also explain now that we have 2 hours for this meeting. We're going to be able to squeeze in everybody that's registered up to the end of last night, and we're going to be able to offer 15 minutes total, so there'll be 10 minutes for presentation and 5 minutes for questioning. It's up to the presenters if they wish to exceed that 10 minutes. I'll do my best to give you a 2-minute warning, let's say at 8 minutes, and then if you're exceeding it, I'll give you a warning when we're coming up to 15 minutes. So with that, I'd like to deal with Mr. Houston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for those introductory comments. We do have a full slate of presenters. We have an amendment to Bill 243 that we'd like to table at the appropriate time. But what I'd ask is I'd make a motion that we, in the interest of those people that have traveled down, we respect this time schedule and then revert back to the FMA so we can do our motion at that time. I'd like to make that motion.
Okay, I don't see any problems with that. So we'll deal with 241, 242. We'll hear on the Financial Measures Act. We won't deal with the motion. We'll await your amendment at the end of the day and then move on to Bill 242. Okay. Mr. Jessam.
Not to be difficult, but we have a 9 a.m. presentation from our FMA presenter. I don't know if that makes it difficult for them.
No, we'll be able to hear her. We'll just forego deliberation till we hear from the witnesses on all the bills. Okay, Bill 241, the Change of Name Act. Could I have a motion to refer? Ms. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that Bill 241, Change of Name Act, be returned to the Chamber without amendment.
Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you very much. Bill 246. Ms. Miller.
As well. Mr. Chair, I move that Bill number 246, the Opioid Damage and Health Care Costs Recovery Act, be returned to the chamber without amendment.
Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you very much. So let's move on now to Bill number 243, and our first presenter is Wendy Lill and Don LeBlanc. And it looks like we just have Wendy Lill here from the Community Homes Action Group. Wendy, the floor is yours.
You just do have me this morning, and that really is because the timing was very difficult for anybody else to come out at such short notice, and I just seem to have more availability. So I'm afraid you'll just have to listen to me. And I have brought several comments from others, though. So thank you for the opportunity to address the committee today and to share our concerns with the Financial Measures Act that has just passed second reading. We're here to talk about how this budget bill impacts Nova Scotians with disabilities and their right to live good lives in inclusive communities. Our observations on the recent budget pertain to that. I'm Wendy Lill, and I'm the chair of Community Homes Action Group. We've been around now for 10 years. CHAG is a group of concerned citizens, healthcare and social service and legal professionals, parents and advocates, formed in 2010 to draw attention to the government's to the crisis in residential options for persons with disabilities and to work with government to find solutions. I'm also the mother of an amazing young man who has a developmental disability and also lives a full and productive and supported family life in a small group home in Dartmouth. Most aspects of my life have been informed by our journey together. Thanks, Sam. Because of the speed with which this bill is being processed, none of my colleagues were able to attend, as I said, but they've sent some family stories to add to the presentation. And at the end, if I have some time, I'll invite you to another event in the communities where you can learn much more about the lives of the people we're talking about. They're your constituents too. So first, a bit of background. A moratorium on the creation of small community-based homes for persons with disabilities in the mid-1990s, led to a critical and growing shortage of community options. At that time, there were still many hundreds living in large congregate facilities at a time when the provinces across the country were far ahead of Nova Scotia in terms of deinstitutionalization. Since then, the shortage of supported community living capacity has grown through several governments and all political stripes. From a wait list of many hundreds living in institutions and hundreds more with aging families in the community, the wait list has now grown to nearly 1,600. In 2013, the current government adopted the Roadmap, Choice, Equality, and Good Lives in Inclusive Communities. It's a 10-year time frame for significantly increasing community-based living options while decreasing reliance on institutions. So far, however, the allocation of resources needed to create the capacity is still woefully inadequate. And the lack of political action on this file has had dire consequences in people's lives. The Emerald Hall human rights case last year found the government had clearly violated the human rights of 3 Nova Scotians for many years by failing to provide the resources necessary to allow them to live in community and not locked away. The Disability Rights Coalition, another of our partners, was instrumental in bringing this case to the fore. In May, the UN Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities visited Canada and Halifax. I'm sure some of you had the opportunity to meet with her. And she reported that we still lag far behind in the implementation of the obligations under the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. We too believe that, like the UN, we believe that home is a human right, and there are many good peoples in our community eager to move that forward. In April and October 2019, Autism Nova Scotia held a supported housing summit where hundreds of family members, First Voice advocates, and service deliverers and civil servants came together to share their knowledge, experience, and commitment to creating the kinds of supporting housing choices needed. In January of this year, our group expressed our concerns about slow pace and wait lists to the community, to the Minister of Finance, and called again for significant ongoing financial commitment towards meeting the roadmap goals. Which brings us to the budget 2020. The two relevant items in the budget around these issues are the following. $7.4 million to begin transitioning 50 residents out of ARC's, Adult Residential Centers, and RRC's, Regional Rehabilitation Centers, and $2.8 million to increase the Flex In-Home program. It is almost 7 years since government adopted the roadmap, and a 10-year time frame is to significantly increase community-based living options. Since then, the wait lists have gone upwards, not downward. Obviously, we are hopeful that 50 people will finally be able to move out of institutions and take their rightful place in the communities. But our experience this far has left us somewhat skeptical. In 2017, the government announced they were going to open 8 small option homes in Nova Scotia. And to date, only 3 of these homes are fully operational, 3 more are on the runway, and 2 are still in the planning stages. So we wonder how long these 50 individuals will have to wait. And at this pace, how long will the 1,600 people on wait lists have to wait? And how many will die waiting? In this budget, there is no mention of addressing the hundreds of people on wait lists for small option homes, which is the preferred preference for people in the community. At this point, the system is gridlocked. Choices are not there for families. Despite the findings of the Human Rights Board of Inquiry and the warning about violating the rights of our population, there are no choices. In the 2020 budget, the other addition to the DSP program targeted for our population is an amount of $2.8 million for the Flex In-Home program. Again, while welcome, this does not tackle the central issue around creating increased capacity of supported homes. In closing, there are hundreds of young adults now on wait lists living with aging parents, wanting to start their lives, take their rightful place in homes in their community, and they are no closer today than they were 7 years ago. And the mental health and physical health costs and the stress of caring for young adults or loved ones with complex needs are very real. We need action now on clearing this wait list and offering real choices for these vulnerable citizens. We all respond to human stories much better than numbers. If I had time, I may have time, I'd be glad to share a few stories with you. I think I'm not going too late here.
2.5 minutes.
2.5 minutes.
2.5 minutes.
Dawn LeBlanc, one of our CHAG members who wanted to be here today, a social worker for over 20 years, working with families and individuals, has shared some stories here. Here's an example. One woman in HRM has 4 children. Her oldest son has Tourette's syndrome. His younger brother, Christopher, has autism spectrum disorder. Christopher just turned 22. He still lives with his mother and father. Since her son was diagnosed with their conditions, the mother has been unable to return to full-time work. The demands she needs to meet at home are too great. My role has just been to advocate for them, full-time, non-stop from morning to night. I'm getting older. My husband's getting older. We feel exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. The past summer, they received a call from Department of Community Services informing them that a place in a small option home had become available. But they knew their son and they knew what he needed, and they felt it wasn't the right fit for him. And it would mean the end also of all of his activities. I know the perfect place isn't out there, she said, but it's got to be right. We all know that about our young people. But with a significant wait list, the Department of Community Services have told them they were likely to be 2 years more before Christopher's case would be revisited. There are many more scenarios, and one worst-case scenario, we know of a young woman with physical disability who is hoping to move into a small option home, which would meet the accessibility and care needs she had. She had been waiting for years for her dream home, and unfortunately, she died waiting. I'm running out of time, but I want to say that even though there are many people here who are fearful of speaking out because they are worried about losing whatever support they are getting, and many people are getting much support, but there is now a sense of real urgency and desperation, and families want to speak out. And they are going to be, in the weeks and months ahead, coming to visit their MLAs and just sharing their struggles and their dreams. And there will also be a community meeting at Club Inclusion on April the 7th for families to gather and talk about how to get real action for their loved ones. And you're all welcome, and you will all be getting an invitation, and we hope to see you there. Thank you for your time.
You're right on 10 minutes. Thank you very much, Ms. Lill. Questions? We'll begin with Mr. Jessom.
Ms. Lill, thanks for your time this morning. I recently hosted a meeting with a constituent at my office on this topic, so it's pretty timely. I'm wondering if you'd be able to shed some light on perhaps the breakdown with respect to that 1,600. Do you know how many of these 1,600 individuals would be a part of the Flex program?
Ms. Lill?
I have a whole lot of statistics at home, and I don't have them in front of me. I can't answer that. I imagine there are many hundreds in the Flex at home program, and they are receiving supports, all sorts of supports, respite supports, various rehab supports to help them as they live with at home with their families. I know I can say that there are the place that has the most. There are many wait lists. There's people waiting to get out of their homes, and that's. There's many people wanting to get into independent living supports, which is a category of 30 hours or less of support a week, and there are a large number of people who are able to be supported in the community, in apartments, in that kind of housing where they just get the supports they need for whatever it is, whether it's to help with banking, to help with cooking, shopping, communicating, whatever. So it's a large range between the 30 hours a week to the people that need 24-hour support.
3 minutes remaining, Mr. Lohr, and then Mr. Burrell, if we have time.
Thank you, Mrs. Lill. Appreciate your being here and your commitment to your son. And I guess what I would say is that the storyline of aging parents with adult children with special needs is something I certainly heard in the Annapolis Valley too, and wondering how long they can continue to keep up the heavy workload of that, and wanting to have them in the community, in their own community that they've lived in, and not somewhere else. And have them in a small options home. And I guess my question would be around that. Do you have any idea, and has there been any study done of the actual numbers of aging parents? And I know we know it anecdotally. I see it in my own area, and I'm just wondering, is there data associated with that, or what's your sense of the actual number of the 1,600 who are on the wait list who would have parents who are senior citizens now?
Ms. Lill?
That's a good question, and I think there's need for a lot more research on that. And I want to say that one theme that I hear over and over is that people are afraid to come forward and talk about this issue because they are getting some support and they are fearful that they will lose it. And we know that one person in our group, Ruth Strubank, who I was quoting her here. I didn't mention it actually, but she says that there are people I will just quote her if I can find it. Maybe I won't. But she says that she's seeing families becoming more and more desperate. The only way for people to get anywhere, unfortunately, is to break down and to have some kind of an episode, have their individual end up in a merge or something, and that's it's emergency kind of situations that get something moving, and that's a tragedy, because that's the last thing you want to do with a vulnerable person that you're looking after. But I'd love to see more work on that, more research, and just open that up to the media, to our communities, and the meeting that we are having on April the 9th. There will be a lot of people talking about that, and maybe one of the actions going forward is asking for some really serious research into that, and what the numbers really are, and the health status, the mental health status, physical health status of the caregivers now, as they all age, including the individuals they're caring for.
Thank you. Unfortunately, that's the end of our time. Thank you, Ms. Lill, for coming in today and sharing your views. We
Thank you very
appreciate
much.
it. Thank you. Just to note on Bill 243, members should have a letter from the IWK Health Center with respect to the bill. Ms. Miller?
Yeah, FMA is a very serious bill, serious act, and well, I know the opposition also has an amendment that they want to bring to this committee today. I don't feel that there's 8 people making that decision. I think that this should be brought to the chamber, so I'd like to make it for discussion. So I'd like to make a motion that the Financial Measures Act be returned to the House without amendment, and that the amendment be discussed in chamber.
Thank you. Discussion on the motion. Mr. Lohr?
Well, I do want to discuss the motion, but I'd just like to ask a point of order. I think we had a motion just previously that said that we would discuss the FMA at our amendment, which we do want to have discussed here after we had heard from the presenters for Bill 242. I just want to ask that question.
Thank you. It was not in the form of a motion, so it was an agreement.
Okay.
Mr. Houston.
Okay. So just for clarity, can we restate the motion that's on the floor first off?
Ms. Miller, could you restate the motion?
Absolutely. I move that Bill 243, the Financial Measures Act, be returned to the chamber without amendment, and that any further amendments be discussed at the time in Committee of the Whole House.
Mr. Houston.
Okay. We're not in favor of that motion for a number of reasons. The most significant reason being is it's an effort to circumvent a very important part of the process in Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia is very unique in its Law Amendments Committee process to allow Nova Scotians to come and appear before a committee and discuss legislation that matters to them. So we know the history of this government in trying to silence well-accepted procedures of the legislature, thinking, of course, first and foremost of the Public Accounts Committee, which this government made moves to completely gut and essentially render irrelevant. And that's an important process for public accountability. So we saw that happen with public accounts. We're now seeing it today. What I would say to the Nova Scotians that have gathered here today to speak to legislation and have a time slotted to speak to legislation, I'd say right now I'm sorry. I tried to respect your time by allowing you to schedule time and have your organize your day today to come here and appear before committees and speak at a certain time. I made a motion at the beginning of this committee to allow your times to be respected. But that's out the window now, because now we're going to talk about the FMA. Because of the members' effort to stifle the discussion, I will tell you that I'm now prepared to speak in great length at the FMA about the FMA, given the members' efforts to stifle that discussion. I will see that effort and I will raise it. I will speak on the FMA for a number of hours starting right now. So I would ask that while I speak on the FMA, you maybe, in the interest of your time, work with the clerks to reschedule your presentation, because none of them will proceed as scheduled. So since we're going to have the discussion on the FMA, I think what we...
Excuse me, Mr. Houston, with all due respect, I think I'm concerned that you are using the public as leverage for political reasons here. You have all the time in the world in the legislature to put forward your pre-prepared amendment that you brought to this table, and you have an opportunity as a member of the legislature to bring it before the House and talk 17 hours on it. Mr. Houston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will have that privilege, and I may well exercise that privilege, but I also have the privilege of speaking to the FMA, and I would like to exercise that privilege right now, because this is an important committee of the legislature, and whilst it might not be respected by the members opposite, it is respected by certainly my caucus and presumably the entirety of the opposition. So the FMA is a significant piece of legislation. I do want to speak to the motion that would basically a motion which is an effort to silence any discussion of the FMA at this committee. I find that outrageous. This is a committee that is meant to discuss pieces of legislation. And so when I hear a motion put on this floor to silence discussion about a piece of legislation before this House, any piece of legislation before this House, but certainly one as significant that basically controls almost $12 billion of spending, and that touches every program in this province. When I see a motion to silence any discussion of a piece of legislation that's significant...
Order, please. Mr. Houston, you have indicated you're going to speak for hours. I am going to go to the next member on this.
Yes, the floor, as long as he wants it. That's definitely precedent. It's been done before. Michelle Sampson did it. There's no restriction on it.
Okay. I've been advised by Ledge Counsel that President will allow Mr. Houston to speak for hours. Go ahead, Mr. Houston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do understand the precedent of this committee is that when a member has the floor to speak about a piece of legislation, that member's comments should not be truncated, and nor should they be. This is the time when members can speak to legislation and stand up for all Nova Scotians. And it's the opportunity for legislators to raise voice to the issues that matter. So in terms of the FMA, I think when we stand back and think about the big picture of the FMA, of course we have a government that wants us to wants to push the headline news about the province of Nova Scotia. And when I think of some of the headline news that the government is pushing forward, of course, we hear numbers around GDP. A lot of times we often specifically hear Halifax GDP, 2.2%. And when you think about that in isolation, I mean, that sounds good. We hear total immigration numbers. I think we had total immigration numbers last year in the range of 5,000, 6,000, 7,000, and that's a headline number that sounds good on the front of it, because of course economic growth and our population growth go hand in hand. We need people to grow our economy, and the business portfolio and the immigration portfolio, those are two portfolios that are certainly near and dear to me. In fact, when I became leader of the official opposition, I kept both of those critic assignments. I maintain them both because you know, it is important that we grow our economy, and it's important that we raise the population of this province. We know that when that happens, when that happens, it triggers. There are impacts to that, and certainly housing is one that we know is a major impact as well. But I will talk about that, and I want to respect. I want to come back to Ms. Lill's important comments as well. But in terms of the economy and basically the GDP of the province, I mean, obviously economic issues are a bit of a comfort zone for me. I'm a chartered accountant. I got my designation here, but I spent some time in Bermuda in offshore finance, worked in venture capital there. And that was an exciting time in my life. My kids were born there, was newly married, and it was working for a growing company in an exciting place. It was an exciting time, but certainly for me, like many Nova Scotians, the call to return home to Nova Scotia was very strong. And that's why Carol and I decided to raise our family here in Nova Scotia. And I have to say, we moved back to Nova Scotia in 2007, and that was the best decision that we could have made. And I think it's important that for me, I was a professional accountant. I had lots of options. There's lots of places we could have moved. There's lots of places we could have raised our family. But we had a lot of choices. And as a professional accountant, there was opportunities for us here back in Nova Scotia, and I understand that those opportunities don't exist for everyone. And that's really the challenge for this province. The challenge is to make sure that there are opportunities for everyone. And I believe there are somewhere in the range of 20,000 Nova Scotians living and working outside of Nova Scotia. 20,000 Nova Scotians living and working outside of Nova Scotia. And I would hazard a guess that most of them would want to return to Nova Scotia. That's the call that we as Nova Scotians, as Maritimers, feel to come back. I imagine that most of those 20,000 people and their significant others and families, they would want to get back here. And we need them back here. We need people in this province. So let's go back to those headline numbers that I talked about, and I talked about specifically the Halifax GDP in the range of 2%. And if you scratch below that number, if you scratch below the Halifax number, any guesses from the members opposite of what is the provincial number? The provincial number we talked about yesterday is 0.4%. So what does that tell us? That means that Halifax is growing, but the rest of the province is shrinking. When you have Halifax in the 2+ range and a province in 0.4, the rest of the province is shrinking. Now, all of a sudden, that headline number that the government would have you believe isn't so appealing anymore. And the same is true on immigration. When you look at the immigration number that the government heralds, which is in the range of 5,000–6,000 people, and you ask yourself, where are these folks going? They're going primarily to Halifax. And here's what's happening around the province. When you think about where those people are going, here's what's happening around the province. Since 2006,
Order, please. Point of order for Ms. Miller.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, what we're seeing here is an attempt to take this committee. I mean, all these people have come, it's been scheduled. This is in, the people have all scheduled to present. There was no earlier information that this amendment would be made. Usually an amendment is made, it's discussed, it's returned to the chamber, or it's ruled on here. My point was that we were we had the ability, in the interest of time and interest of all these lovely people that have come here to speak, and we've been blamed at taking their time. It's not us doing it. So I want to make that very clear that anything that's being said in this chamber now, debating this bill, can be said in the full chamber in the House. So this is an attempt just to stall the Law Amendments Committee and, interfere with the lives of all these people who have come here to present today on future bills. So I move that we, or I'm calling for a vote on my amendment.
All in favor? Agreed?
He's still got the floor. Breaking the rules. It's up to you.
All in favor?
The president of this chamber.
Agreed. Motion is carried. Bill number 242. Bill number 242, Rebecca Rose.
This has happened before. What will happen is the precedent will be that the speaker will send it back, the bill back, to the committee. That's the danger.
Ms. Rose, the floor is yours.
Great, because my parking is going to run out. Okay. Good morning. My name is Rebecca Rose. I am a resident of Dartmouth South, though I grew up in Dartmouth North and also in Cape Breton. I'm here to express my support for Bill 242, the Protecting Access to Reproductive Health Care Act, put forth by my MLA, Claudia Chender. This past Wednesday night, I sat at my desk watching the debate around and the passage of Bill 242. Watching Ms. Chender motivate the bill, speak of her grandmother's, her mother's, her sister's experience both in accessing abortion and making it accessible to others, brought me to tears. This is why, as a Facebook friend of mine said, we need feminist leadership. I am so grateful to all of the women who stood up and shared their experiences on Wednesday. It was the most powerful debate I have personally ever witnessed in the House. When I was 17, I moved to Toronto to attend university. Through my involvement with my campus women's center, I became very involved in pro-choice activism, both on and off campus. As an 18-year-old budding feminist activist, it was the continued fight for reproductive justice, for safe, legal, and accessible abortion that politicized me. And 17 years later, here I am presenting to you about it in this House. During my time as a student and a pro-choice activist, both in Toronto and here at home in Nova Scotia, I have witnessed my share of anti-abortion, anti-choice, quote, protests on campus, at busy intersections, outside of clinics and hospitals. I have seen giant posters that compare abortion to the Holocaust and to the lynching of Black people. These posters were complete with graphic pictures of victims of concentration camps and of lynchings, and I'm not making this up, and juxtaposed with what they claim to be aborted fetuses. I do not say this to alarm or shock, but just to make people aware of the reality. I have stood alongside other pro-choice activists holding massive pro-choice banners to block these gruesome and offensive posters. I have heard abortion compared to genocide on many occasions, actually, and people, yes, who are mostly women, but also trans and non-binary folks who have gotten abortions called murderers. In reading Ms. Chender's bill, I zoned in on the words besetting, interference, and protest. I know this is, or at least will be, a legal document, and these are legal terms. But for me, not a lawyer or a lawmaker, these terms and what I have witnessed amount to harassment. You see, I have been to and organized my share of protests, of marches, picket lines, and even occupations. But I think we all know that what happens outside of hospitals and abortion clinics is different. Even if they are not brandishing signs about genocide and murder, these anti-choice, quote, activists are there not to hold the powerful to account, but to pressure, intimidate, and coerce people who have and provide abortions, which is a legal medical procedure. They are there to make these people feel so badly, so guilty, so upset that they can't follow through, or that they at least regret their decision. And it is their decision to make. I have sometimes heard anti-choice harassment outside of clinics and hospitals reduced to, quote, grandmothers praying. As a queer person, I can tell you, though, that being prayed at in this manner, insinuating that you are or are doing something that is sinful, that needs saving, can be a deeply upsetting experience. Though usually when I'm being prayed at or told that my lifestyle is a sin or that I'm going to burn in hell, I'm usually in a crowd of people at a protest or at a parade. The folks going into abortion clinics or hospitals are not so lucky to have that strength in numbers. Let alone when you're going in for a medical procedure, one that you are likely at least very anxious about, and potentially very upset about. This can be a very hard experience. Before I wrap up, I just want to give a shout out to some of the folks currently doing the work around this issue. The Abortion Support and Services Atlantic Group, which is phenomenal, and the abortion doulas. Specifically, if you haven't listened to Brian Goldman's interview on the CBC, I'm a CBC nerd, with Shannon Hardy, an abortion doula, please do. It's incredibly powerful and eye-opening. Also, on the eve of International Women's Day, I would be remiss if I didn't mention all of the women and other folks in this province that for decades upon decades upon decades have been fighting for our right to choice, to safe, legal birth control, contraceptive abortion. So thank you to my feminist elders and predecessors. And so I said I stand here today, but I'm sitting. So I sit here today as someone who was born and raised in Nova Scotia, as a woman, as a feminist, an activist who deeply values the right to protest, to encourage you to pass this bill and end the harassment of those exercising their right to choose. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rose. Questions? Ms. Chender.
Thank you for coming today and for sharing those words. And I was struck by the part of your remarks where you said, when I'm faced with that kind of threatening behavior, I'm often in a crowd, but people accessing these services are often alone. What impact do you think it might have? Like, as someone who has experienced that kind of harassing or besetting?
Ms. Rose?
Yeah, I was thinking about it last night when I was writing my comments, and I was thinking about the most grotesque examples of anti-choice activism I've seen, and I've seen those posters that I talked about comparing abortion to genocide with those photos more than once, and that is, obviously that's made a mark on me, and I'm not Jewish, I'm not Black. I actually haven't had an abortion, though I've definitely cared for folks after they've had abortions. And it's upsetting for me. It's made a mark on me, 17 years later, and still talking about it. But yeah, I mean, when you're in a pride parade or at a protest, or even when you're walking down the street and there's someone brandishing a sign that says, you know, you're going to burn in hell because you're gay. It's upsetting, and it's upsetting even if, you know, we are at a pride parade and we're able to surround those folks and block them out. And like I said, I mean, that's something that has stuck with me. And even though I know it's not a sin, and I have a great supportive family and an amazing partner and a great life, and I'm very, very out, like so out. There's like very much no going back, even if I wanted to. It still hurts. It definitely hurts. And, you know, as someone who's like camped outside of clinics to what's that called when you walk someone? Sorry, I have a concussion, and so it's flaring up a bit right now. When you accompany someone into the clinic, yeah, I can't imagine. I mean, abortion, you know, even if it's like a decision that you're really sure about, some people don't struggle with the decision. You know, some people really struggle with it and it stays with them their whole life, and some people don't. It's a decision they make and they're content with it. But it's going to be a medical procedure. You're going to be anxious about it. They're going to be going into your body. You know, it's a really personal thing. You're up really, really early because they get everyone in really, really early because of the protests. You're probably, you know, tired, and I can't imagine if you don't have a supportive partner, if you don't have a supportive family, if you've driven 5 hours from Cape Breton, if you've drained your savings account to stay in a hotel, then I know that even just the praying, even just the signs, even if they aren't as gruesome as the ones I talked about before, would have an impact. It's just not necessary. It's just not necessary, and I don't understand why someone would take someone on what might be one of the most vulnerable days of their lives and subject them to that type of harassment.
Any other questions? Thank you very much, Ms. Rose. Thank you for coming in. Ruth Robert? Welcome, Ms. Robert. So you have up to 10 minutes or a little more if you wish, and a total of 15 minutes. The floor is yours.
Well, my name is Ruth Robert, and I'll be here representing Campaign Life Coalition, and also many people who emailed me saying we would like to be able to speak, but we can't because this bill has gone through so quickly, first reading, second reading, with little more than a day between them, that many people who are interested in expressing their opinion will be unable to because of how quickly this has gone through. I would like to remind the committee members that they are, of course, responsible for the public interest and for the laws that they make for the public. And it is therefore important to be aware of public opinion. And so far as I can tell, there has not been enough time to truly contemplate where people stand on this. It has been said to not be a contentious bill, that there's a great deal of support for it. I read in the CBC News that there was a petition with 140 signatures for it. There is a petition with over 3,000 against it. Not because people want to shame women, but because they value constitutional freedoms. So that is where I will be addressing first. Freedom of expression, freedom of conscience, freedom of religion, and freedom of peaceful assembly. I have heard the counter-argument that these bubble zones do not violate freedom of expression because protesters may simply protest outside the bubble zone. I find this to be an inadequate counter-argument. Firstly, because the nature of a protest is that the location matters and that people like to emphasize what is happening in what location to better make their point. To have the location data removed does diminish the power of a protest and therefore inhibits an individual's constitutional rights. Furthermore, The reason for these bubble zones has been said to be to protect women. Abortion Rights Coalition of Canada presented data in April 2018 that indicated there has been no severe or moderate violence from pro-life individuals in over 20 years. So this means that the only potential violence is not violent at all, but merely emotional. And I would say that people who are struggling with abortion, considering it, have had one, just don't want to think about it for whatever personal reason, they can be affected by this no matter where the protest is held. This means that if you follow your thought process through to conclusion, you will say protests cannot happen in Canada, not merely in the cases of abortion, but any contentious issue. Because wherever there are divisive opinions, there are strong emotions. Therefore, I fear this bill sets precedent that will diminish, if not completely abolish, constitutional rights of freedom of expression, peaceful assembly, and conscience. And so I would hope that this would be considered by the committee going forward. I would again like to emphasize the peaceful nature of these protests. I was the individual who organized and led the 40 Days for Life campaign that was held in fall of last year. I required all of my volunteers to sign statements saying that they would be peaceful, they would not violate any laws, they would not litter, they would respect all law enforcement personnel. And I would also say that there are many entrances to this hospital. We were only standing near one entrance, which means those who were intimidated by our presence could enter from any of the other entrances. Additionally, because this is a hospital, we do not know who is going in, for what reasons. Therefore, we cannot directly target abortion-minded women. That is not the reason for our presence. The reason for our presence is to offer hope for the women who maybe don't want abortions. And I speak from personal experience on this one, for two accounts that directly affected me and my family. The first was me. When my mother was pregnant with me, it was a very difficult pregnancy. She had already miscarried my elder brother quite late. He was almost born, stillborn. And when she was pregnant with me, the same problems came up again. And she was put in a position where terminating a pregnancy might have been considered the wiser option by some medical counselors. And she wanted this child, so this was not suggested to her. But she was told that she would need to take medication that could result in a miscarriage. This is not an abortion. It's just one of those situations where the mother's life is in danger, the child could die too, but you gotta do what you gotta do. So she was given the injection. She thought she'd had a miscarriage, and she was devastated. The doctor saw the blood, said, "I'm so sorry. By law, I have to give you an ultrasound. I was born in Japan, that was the law there." And to everyone's shock and amazement and joy, I was still there, because I had been given a chance to fight that medication that could otherwise have killed me. And so we were overjoyed. And then just last year, my cousin gave birth. My cousin has epilepsy, and when she found out she was pregnant, she was on a medication that could cause deformities in a child. Her doctor did recommend abortion. You don't want to take that risk. But my cousin did not want to do that. She said she would care for her child no matter what, and therefore she chose to carry the pregnancy through, despite the opposition. She gave birth to a perfectly healthy 10-pound baby. And so I stand outside that hospital, not to condemn women if they need to make this choice, if they feel that it's necessary. I disagree, but I'm not there to condemn. I am there for the women who want their children and feel they have no other recourse, to say, I'm here, and I can tell you from experience, sometimes there are other options. I know because I have seen it. That is why I also want to say that this bill will also lead to a violation of due process. It is assuming guilt, assuming that we are there to harass, intimidate, condemn. And therefore, it is punishing us for crimes that we have not committed and likely never will. I would remind committee members that in the Criminal Code of Canada, I believe it's section 264, anything that would be harassing, intimidating towards women is already criminal. It is criminal to intimidate people, like to harass people, to assault people. It is criminal. I would not contest that. It should be criminal. But because it is already criminal, we do not need a bill that will just punish people who are expressing their rights to their opinions. It will also violate freedom of religion in the process. The bill talks about besetting, but it's very broad. Besetting, to stand near to someone with the purpose of dissuading them. And then when you combine this with section 15 of the bill, a police officer may arrest without warrant. This is a gross violation of due process. Without warrant, they may arrest anyone with reasonable or probable cause. How do you define reasonable or probable? If a nun walks through there, most nuns are pro-life. Their presence might cause some people who are Catholic going in for abortion to reconsider. Is that grounds for arrest? Violation of due process, violation of freedom of religion. She might not even be protesting, but her freedom of religion is in jeopardy. I spoke to the Imam, Abdullah Yusri, about getting Muslims involved in our campaign, because many Muslims are also pro-life. He was supportive. If a Muslim woman wearing an abaya or a hijab walks through this access zone, is this grounds for arrest? This bill is extremely troublesome because it does not protect women. It merely violates people's constitutional rights. We already have laws in place to protect women. I would also say, too, that it really puts people in jeopardy because it puts the emphasis on one side of the argument. I've mentioned earlier that where there is opposition, there is emotion.
1 minute.
Women who are getting abortions will feel that emotion. But I have been spat at and cursed at and verbally assaulted. That is difficult for me. But I would not say there needs to be bubble zones around pregnancy centers, because only through dialogue can we gain the best truth. Because by talking to each other, the best ideas will be preserved, the worst ideas will go away. Therefore, there's no need for a bubble zone, because if pro-lifers are truly terrible, they'll already be arrested on the laws that they already exist, or their thoughts will be considered so ridiculous, people will laugh them out of the province. We don't need this bill.
Thank you very much, Ms. Robert. Any questions from the committee? Thank you very much for coming in and sharing your views. Sharon Collins has canceled, so we can now move to Gina Grattan. Welcome, Ms. Grattan. The floor is yours.
Hi, thank you. Can everyone hear me right? Am I talking into this? Great. First time at law amendments. Hi, everyone. My name is Gina Grattan. I'm here to speak in favor of this bill. I'm often found outside these walls protesting on the other side. I've protested at government offices. I've protested at police departments, at schools. But when I'm protesting, I've never actively prevented someone from accessing any type of vital service. The freedom to peaceful assembly is definitely important, but it is not peaceful if you are harassing vulnerable people. It is not peaceful if you are flashing violent, graphic images to scare someone out of making a decision that you don't personally agree with. You don't protest hospitals because you're upset with healthcare. You lobby government officials in charge of making those decisions, like we've seen people on both sides do today. I, like everyone in this room, has had a friend or family member who has accessed abortion services. Even if they have not disclosed that to you, we all have these connections. The thought of sending my younger high school-aged friends to a clinic in front of an extremely agitated crowd hurts my heart. The thought of referring a struggling friend to an experience like this also hurts my heart, and the people of our province deserve better than this heartache. The proposed bubble zone would not only protect the well-being of women, but non-binary and trans folks. as well as our youth, which I think is an important factor to really consider here. I'm encouraged by the support we've seen so far by our government officials. Discussing this bill and the fact that it's made it this far really means a lot to me and a lot of people in this province. And I came here today to make sure that you all know that this decision is long overdue. It's needed and it's appreciated here in Nova Scotia. I appreciate and acknowledge the doctors, the nurses, the healthcare workers who are fighting to offer us these services alongside the fight of human rights activists who are also fighting to ensure that we have access to these. I'm so inspired by the people who are sharing their extremely personal decisions in order to put this protection into law. It is not an easy thing to talk about, but yet it seems so crucial that we disclose these personal things in order to really get our point across. I'm just a student. I'm just your regular constituent. I took time off my studies today to come here. It's thesis season, so there's a lot happening. This is really important to the health of our province, the health of this province's people. I also come from a Catholic family who understands that freedom of religion means the right to practice what you believe, not police or denounce the decisions of others. And I think that's all I really have to say today. Thank you so much for listening to me, and I am very encouraged by the fact that we're discussing this bill today, and it's meant a lot to me and to everyone I've talked about, so the support is definitely there in Nova Scotia. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gratton. Ms. Roberts?
Thank you. I've been struck at the reaction, not principally to how this actual bill will change things on the ground, but particularly to the reaction to the public discussion, to the discussion in the legislature about the need for respecting women's right and ability to choose things related to her body. And I wonder if you would just elaborate on that a little bit more. Why do you think it's important that we have debated this bill, not just because of the bill, but because of the conversation that it's opened up in a public sphere?
Ms. Gratton.
Sorry. That's a great question. I have a lot of answers to that, I think. One, I'm not sure a lot of people even know kind of what the state or what the rules are around protests like this. I know that we see them a lot in Ottawa, but it's less publicized here in Nova Scotia and Halifax specifically. Within like my communities, I go to university. I have a lot of university-aged friends. I'm friends with a lot of activists. We hear of these protests and when they're going to be occurring, and we try to organize not a counter-protest, but just to be a presence that will protect those who are accessing the services. So we would offer to like walk people in from their cars kind of into a clinic and things like that. And so there's been so many feminists who have been really working around this and not getting a lot of coverage. So I think that this bill really brings forward that this is an issue we have in this province, and this bill could really tackle it. I will also say 50 meters is great to start, but as we've seen across the country, healthcare professionals have also been advocating for a larger bubble zone of up to like 150 meters. So, but yeah.
Mr. Jessom.
Thank you for your time this morning, Ms. Gratton. I mean, there's been a lot said about this subject over the past several days, but I just wanted to acknowledge a point that you made that really hit home with respect to, I guess, not targeting the individuals who are accessing a legal service. Your point about trying to inform and protest any given scenario is best suited, directed at those who manufacture the precise decisions, not those, again, who are accessing the legal service. So I don't have a question. I just, that really hit home.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gratton. Kevin Ahern. Welcome, Mr. Ahern. Up to 10 minutes or more, total of 15, including the questions. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, members of the committee. My name is Kevin Ahern, and I firmly believe in the sanctity of life. I will keep my comments, however, in the realm of freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and freedom of assembly, which are all derived from the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. This bill, Bill number 242, was written with the intention to protect abortion patients, physicians, and service providers from harassment, bullying, or other forms of besetting. But it goes out of its way to make sure that those who would protest abortion have no means to legally defend themselves. For instance, there was an incident during the 40 Days for Life campaign that I participated in the fall of 2019, where our signs saying "Pray for the end of abortion" were ripped apart, stolen, and then thrown away in a trash can by a passing woman. Now, under the rules of this bill, would I have been arrested if I had filmed this woman in the act? Regardless of a person's affiliation with an abortion provider, I would condemn these. I would hope we could all condemn that woman's actions. This sort of, quote, traumatic experience, Megan Boudreau, the woman who instigated the petition that started this bill, had from seeing pro-life advocates like myself, is less to do with our actions and more to do with her reaction. If this law was applied equally, it would also extend to prohibiting freedom of assembly outside pro-life women's facilities like Open Door Center or the Tri-County Pregnancy Center in Yarmouth. Would I want to bar freedom of assembly outside these facilities? No, because that encroaches on their right of the people to peacefully protest and express their opinion. I would hope this committee would extend that courtesy to the other side as well. Getting back to Megan Boudreau, it was within her capacity to ignore us and walk by, as so many hundreds of people do. Instead, she chose to confront us, which she has the right to do. And while I enjoy a good debate, silencing your opposition by forcing them to move away so that you cannot simply see them is not the right way to engage. At the heart of this bill is the notion that those who would protest outside abortion facilities are there to intend harm and hurt people going in, patients, physicians, and abortion and service providers of abortion. There are already laws in place to protect against such acts, which renders this bill redundant in those cases. Furthermore, the criteria for a violation is so vague. In particular, I was looking at the word interference. What does that mean in this case? It could simply mean a mother walking by with her children. That could cause a traumatic reaction for a patient going in, or someone wearing a cross, which was someone just walking by innocently. This leads to the fundamental flaw that this bill is based on the perceived offense of the alleged victim more than the actions of the alleged perpetrator. So therefore, the burden of proof in this case would be placed on the perpetrator to prove their innocence instead of proving their guilt. This can lead and messes with the presumption of innocence. This can lead to an easy abuse of the application of this bill and a violation of due process. And as to the intentions of those who would peacefully protest like myself, our intentions are not to traumatize or antagonize patients, which, by the way, we have no way of identifying or targeting. We are there to offer help and support, regardless of the mother's situation, so that she and her child might both live. Getting an abortion is a traumatic experience, regardless of whether there is visible opposition to it. If the mother doesn't feel guilt before terminating her child's life, she might be haunted by that guilt for the rest of her life. Unless, of course, she dehumanizes that child by calling him or her a fetus, a blob of cells, a parasite, a cancer, or a woman's right to reproductive health. We stand as witnesses for these unborn children and to offer an alternative position and opinion. This very nearly affected me personally. My brother, during his pregnancy, was diagnosed with potentially potentially being born with spina bifida. And my parents were given the option to interrupt the pregnancy. That was the word that the doctor used. My parents, both devoutly pro-life, chose to ignore this advice. My brother was born, and now he is a perfectly healthy and happy teenager, going through life as per normal. I will conclude my statements saying that I considered not coming to this event, knowing that there would be quite a lot of opposition to my position, but I feel that it is important that these opinions are made public, and I should not be afraid to speak my opinion and to have the right to peacefully assemble outside these facilities. And by the way, we were very much aware of the private property of the hospital, which we legally followed. We stayed outside on public property, which we have the right to peacefully assemble. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ahern. Any questions? Well, thank you, Mr. Ahern. We do appreciate you coming in and sharing your views. Your comments were very correct, that it's important that everyone feel free to come here and express their views. Ms. Boudreau is next. Well, we'll get someone to just pass it around, I guess. We usually have a page here, but... All right, Ms. Boudreau, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to the committee members here today for allowing me to speak in support of the Reproductive Healthcare Bill 242. My name is Megan Boudreau, and I support the bill exactly how it was initially proposed by the NDP. Reproductive health care services should not be harassed. No person should have to endure harassment for a medical procedure. Anti-abortion protesters should be out of sight for those going in and out of abortion clinics. No matter their decision, patients and practitioners should feel safe and supported when going into a medical procedure. Currently, this is not the case. No one should have to face protesters while seeking medical treatment, but currently that is the case. I have never advocated for anything before in my life, but I absolutely could not go on knowing that I didn't try to help protect my fellow sisters. What I saw was unethical and immoral to do to someone in such a vulnerable and delicate state. So I took it upon myself to try and protect the mental and physical well-being of those seeking abortion. This all started with me having to walk by protesters daily for about a month. I've lived in other provinces and was already aware that they usually had an anti-abortion protest day at the beginning of every October. The Campaign for Life Coalition has a huge following, and they have their anti-abortion protests every October and throughout the year since 1987, starting in California. They have been allowed to harass and protest choice outside of abortion clinics for over 30 years, despite women being granted the right to choose for just as long. I moved to Halifax in September to finish my degree and was honestly taken back by how frequently this group was protesting outside of the VG. I thought about how many people this must have upset and how I wasn't sure if I would be able to have the courage to walk through a line like theirs on my way in for an abortion. They are making something that is already so difficult even more traumatic. This angered me for the sake of my fellow citizens. My heart hurt for everyone who has had the additional trauma of being judged, ridiculed, and harassed while trying to obtain the health care they have a right to. I knew something needed to change. I knew deep down that what these anti-abortion protesters were doing was harmful and wrong. I started with a video, which I posted online, showing my disgust for what they were doing to a vulnerable population. At that time, I wasn't aware of a solution. All I knew was something had to change. Something needed to change. Thankfully, someone on the internet mentioned bubble zones. I immediately started my research and was astonished to find out that many other provinces already have this law in effect. Why doesn't Nova Scotia? Something bad shouldn't have to happen to have this protection in place, but something bad is already happening. I've had so many people reach out to me and thank me for asking for these protesters to move. So many people have been negatively affected by the actions of these protesters. Anti-abortion groups claim to be peacefully protesting, but to quote a local social worker and abortion doula, Shannon Hardy, telling someone that they can't access health care is violence. You can't peacefully take somebody's rights away, regardless of how you're doing it. I became vocal, asking a lot of questions, the most important being, what can I do? I started an online petition to gain awareness on this subject. Over 1,200 people were quick to support safe access for health care. You don't even need to be pro-choice to believe that health care should be harassment-free. It seems like a no-brainer to ask protesters to move away from clinics, offices, homes, and hospitals for everyone's safety and protection. Canadians have a right to access reproductive health care, period. Everyone here knows someone who has had an abortion. And there are so many reasons for why that person would undergo this medical procedure, none of which should be judged or decided by anyone else. It was extremely uncomfortable for me to go around this city asking strangers to talk about bubble zones to protect safe access, safe abortion access. But a small amount of discomfort for them and myself is a small price to pay for a better and safer future. It is inspiring seeing MLAs stand up and share their personal experiences. They have given voice to this by sharing their stories. It is a testament to the fact that a law like this is necessary, not just to protect people seeking safe access to health care, but to show that it is okay to talk about abortion. This isn't about the stigma surrounding abortion. This is about safe access to health care. I am beyond grateful for this collaboration. It is a rare occasion for all parties to be in support. Reproductive health care services should be free from harassment and intimidation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Boudreau. Any questions from the committee? Ms. Roberts?
Thank you. You mentioned that initially you created an online petition in support of changing legislation, and we don't actually accept online petitions at the provincial legislature. How was it that you decided that you needed to engage with the provincial government in particular, including through doing an actual paper petition?
Ms. Boudreau.
I just kept asking questions. This is not something I have ever done before, and hopefully will never have to do again. People just kept telling me what next steps were, some options. I kept researching. I've been doing a lot of additional reading on top of my schoolwork to get this done, so that's the only reason I have any knowledge of how this works at all.
Any further questions? Well, thank you very much for Ms. Boudreau for coming in. Catherine Dingle. I think you've been here to hear the timing of things, so the floor is yours for 10 minutes or more.
Thank you. My name is Catherine Dingle. I'm here on the side of pro-life this morning. I'm very concerned about what I've been reading in the newspaper. I'm concerned at how quickly this is being pushed through without any public consultation. You had your first reading on Monday, I believe the second one on Wednesday, and then now it's in Amendments Committee. And I'm concerned because you're supposed to represent your constituents, and a lot of the constituents have no idea that this is going on. And this is something that people are very concerned about and have some very strong feelings about. And I know there's people who would be here today, except that they didn't know because of the quickness they weren't able to, get away from their job or whatever their other commitments were, so that they could actually participate today. And that's a problem, when we don't have a time to hear from people who are not activists, but regular people who have citizens who have opinions. And I'm not an activist as such, but I have, attended these rallies for a number of years, and I'm concerned because I feel like I read the transcript of the debate and discussion, and I felt like there was a knee-jerk reaction to the word harassment. And I think everybody here, I'm sure everybody here would agree with nobody wants anyone to be harassed. But the question really is, are people being harassed at this site? And is there a need for legislation? You can't just make a law out of thin air when there's actually no legitimate cause for a law to be put into place. And what's happening here is it comes down to a question of our freedom of expression and our free speech right. And I understand, like, this is the sort of the intersection where that may conflict with someone else's rights. And so, but we need to actually address what's really happening here. We had one person who didn't like what they saw, essentially, and made a decision to change that because she didn't like it. So the question is, again, is do we need this? For perhaps the last 12 years, and not every year, I've come to these rallies. These rallies are very peaceful. We used to have them at Province House. And it would be a group of people who just held signs. In fact, the signs that we hold have instructions on the back saying not to engage, stay off the sidewalk. There are rules about the way that we conduct ourselves, and we've never had any complaints. This is something that's really important, is that there's nobody come who could legitimately say that we were harassing them, that we were accosting them, following them, yelling at them, or the kinds of things that we often get accused of. But I've been there for years, and the group of people, the pro-lifers, are the ones that are the quiet ones. And I would encourage everyone here to go to a pro-life rally and see with your own eyes the behavior of the people, because that's really what we're talking about. Because this affects me. There's a lot of people in this room who don't go to pro-life rallies. I do, but this affects me directly. It infringes on where I can stand and express my views, and and have my free speech. Where Miss Megan Boudreau took offense to the appearance of pro-life protesters is a hospital. It's not an abortuary. And it's not a clinic, and we have no idea who's going in there. We don't know if they're having tests today or if they're employees of the hospital or whatever. Where we usually stand is the corner of South Park and South Street. And what we hold at the abortuary is a prayer vigil. That's all it is. And we stand and we pray. Once a year, we go to Roby Street and what used to be Provinces, and we just stand with our signs, and if anyone wants to approach us and talk to us, we'll talk to them. But we are probably 250 feet at least, and that's a guess, but at least 250 feet behind a fence off the property of the VG hospital, and that's where we stand, and that's where we silently pray. This is mostly a Catholic movement, but there are a lot of other people who've joined. But it's silent prayer that we're engaging in, and we don't accost a single person, and we would not know if we wanted to. we would have no idea who it was going in to have an abortion. So it is a silent witness that this is our opinion, that that we have a problem with the taking of human life, of killing children, growing, developing children, human children. You know, if you were people try to dehumanize a human fetus so they can dismiss it, but if we were to fly to Mars and find a human fetus, the world would rejoice and say, there's human life on Mars. Humankind is on Mars, because that's exactly what it is. It's human life. You can't disturb an eagle egg or disturb a nest. You can't move a nest. There's a penalty of up to 5 years or $200,000 for moving a nest, even of migrating birds. And yet we can kill children, growing human children in the womb, and we're doing it day after day at the expense of the taxpayer. So we have strong feelings about human life and the devaluing of human life that's going on, and we need a place. We want to express how we feel, because we think that there should be changes, and approximately 90% of Canadians believe that there should be some restrictions on abortion. And there's none. We are one of only 3 or 4 countries in the world that have no restrictions. Right until the very day the baby is born, we can kill it without any penalty. We can take that child and dismember it and rip it limb from limb and crush its skull and remove it. That baby that's been kicking and rolling around in the mother's womb, we can do it right until the moment of birth. And there's those of us with conscience toward God and with respect of the sacredness of human life that object to this. And we want to make our objections known. We do not, I want to say, we do not accost and attack people, but I will tell you that for anyone who's visited a pro-life rally, that you will see the quiet pro-life protesters not engaging, and you will see the anti-abortion, or the pro-abortionists, the pro-choice movement. They will be screaming and yelling, using whatever chants, and they come up and they walk past you, they walk behind you, they call your names, they swear at you, and they'll get right in your face and scream. And I have seen that with my own eyes. I'm not talking about in Toronto, in Ottawa, I'm talking about here in Halifax. And I'd like to make a point here as well that Windsor Hospital, Regional Hospital, had complaints, and they people who wanted to see a bubble zone, and so presentations were made, and they decided not to go forward with the bubble zone because there was no need, and there is no need in Halifax. What happens in Ottawa, Toronto, and other places may be different, but here we don't need it. Yeah, and I would say yes. I actually looked at Megan Boudreau's Facebook, and I saw some things that alarmed me. She's very much connected to a Solidarity Halifax anti-capitalist, pro-abortion activist, blocking, I've seen, here's the thing, blocking the bridge, the climate change thing, blocking this and that. Just take a look. And if I'm not mistaken, she just moved here in August, September from New Glasgow. She's not even from here. And she just came by. She observed us standing, praying silently, and didn't like the sight of us there. She objected to it. She did not see anyone accosted or anyone harassed.
You're at 10 minutes. You're welcome to proceed.
Okay, thank you. She just didn't like it. She saw us there. We've been there for years. She didn't like it ideologically. This is the time of cancel culture, where if people I don't like what they're doing, then they will focus on people and do everything they can to move them out and to silence them and to cut off their free speech. And this is exactly what's happening. She was ideologically offended at what we were doing because she disagreed with it. But she could not legitimately point to any example of anyone being harassed or accosted. But she played on your sympathies And she found a sympathetic ear in Claudia Chender because that's her point of view as well. And that's okay. I understand people have different points of view. But it's important to recognize and respect that we do have a different point of view, and we have a constitutional right to express it in a peaceful assembly without harassment, of anybody. And we have a right not to be harassed. When we go on her Facebook, they follow us wherever the pro-life rallies are. They post it, and they come and find us, and they harass us there. That's what happens. We're not following pro-choice rallies and going to harass them, or we're not following abortion seekers and attacking them. That's absolutely not true. And it's actually very much the other way around. I wanted to say something else. If I was to take a puppy or a small kitten who had just been born and decide to take it to the middle of the Halifax Commons and announce that I was going to rip it apart limb from limb and crush it and kill it, there would be probably the same group of people come running and do violence to me because I was doing such a cruel thing. Yet, that's exactly what we're doing with small, growing human beings in the womb. We are ripping them limb from limb and killing them in a violent manner. Abortion is an act of violence, and we object to that violence. Yes, and I guess I'd like to say that there may be problems, or have been problems in other clinics in other places, and I don't agree with harassing and harming people, and we're not there to hurt people. But in Halifax and in Nova Scotia, we have had no incidences that are documented anywhere where there's a need for a bubble zone. And another word for bubble zone really is a place where you're limiting speech. It's cutting off speech beyond a certain point. So I just wanted to ask that this committee, I'm not sure how that would go forward, but I'd like to ask them to not proceed with this bill because it's unnecessary. It's ideologically offensive to the pro-choice people. Okay, I understand that there are differences of opinion, but we have done nothing to warrant it, and it feels like a type of punishment and a type of limiting our constitutional rights. We haven't done anything to warrant this, so I'd just like to ask you to consider to not proceed, as the Windsor Hospital decided not to proceed. Yeah, no, I am finished. The Windsor Hospital decided not to proceed. Yeah.
So questions, Ms. Roberts?
You mentioned that you have protested at Province House. Could you consider always protesting at Province House?
Ms. Dingle.
I'm sorry. Would I consider always? No, I think they actually, okay, I'm going to explain a little clearer. There is a prayer vigil held at the VG, only a prayer vigil, where we quietly stand with candles and we pray. And it's a very quiet thing that goes on at the VG. Where we actually protest more as a rally is on Roby Street on the Commons on a Sunday afternoon. And yeah, that's where we are. There's usually like 100 pro-lifers to, maybe 20, or like last year, maybe 8 pro-choice people, but that's where we protest, yeah.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dingle, for coming in and sharing your views. Thank you. Dr. Melissa Brooks. Welcome, Dr. Brooks. Up to 10 minutes or more for presentation and 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for hearing from me today. So I was asked to come and talk to you today because I am an obstetrician gynecologist. I'm also the medical co-director of the Women's Choice Clinic, and I'm also an abortion provider there. And as well, I was an abortion provider in Truro, Nova Scotia, for a few years before I started working in Halifax. And I was hesitant to come here today because I actually try not to be very public about my work as an abortion provider. I did some of my training in BC. I worked with Gary Romalis, Dr. Gary Romalis, who some of you may know was an abortion provider, is now deceased. But he was shot and stabbed on 2 different occasions for his work as an abortion provider by protesters. And I remember going for coffee with him and sitting, at Starbucks, and his personal bodyguard would be sitting at a table, right next to us because he, for the remainder of his career would be followed around by a bodyguard because of his work. And he continued to be an abortion provider despite experiencing such extreme violence. I have colleagues who have installed bulletproof glass in their residence, their personal residence, because they fear violence from abortion protesters. One of my colleagues, Dr. Leanne Yoshida, she was quiet about her work as an abortion provider for many years, but more recently decided to be more vocal. And since becoming more present in the media, has received threatening phone calls to her office on multiple occasions since people are aware of her work as an abortion provider. So I agree that often the protests are not violent, but certainly there are occasions, and in the not so distant past in our country, of quite significant violence from people who call themselves protesters. So for that reason, I've sort of chosen to remain out of the spotlight as an abortion provider because I do have some concern about the safety for myself, my family. I have 2 young children. I remember meeting a lady when I was in medical school whose father was an abortion provider, and it was at a medical student for choice event, and she remembers protesters on her lawn when she was a child because her father was an abortion provider. And it was amazing that she continued to want to be an abortion provider. But these are things that happen in our country to people who provide abortions. The other thing that we do through the Nova Scotia Women's Choice Clinic is we're trying to improve access to medical abortion around the province. We have a network of medical abortion providers, and certainly one of the things that we hear from people when they're considering becoming a medical abortion provider is that they're worried about attracting attention. They don't want people standing in front of their, they're usually family doctors or people who otherwise provide lots of care. They don't want people standing in front of their offices, harassing their patients, harassing them. So I think that this law will make a big difference in terms of encouraging people around the province to provide medical abortion, which certainly, we have a large population of rural women who need access to abortion, and historically, often they've had to come all the way to Halifax. So to be able to provide and encourage family doctors to provide medical abortion in their clinic, I think that this bubble law is going to go a long way towards that. The other thing that I wanted to say is that I don't agree that this is a bill that has anything to do with free speech. I think that if someone is against abortion, they're more than welcome to come down here and talk to you all until they're blue in the face about their reasons for not thinking abortion is correct. But, when women come for an abortion, we talk often about how it's a hard decision for them. It can be a hard decision for them, but for a lot of women, it's not a hard decision. It's what is the obvious and right decision for them. What is universally difficult for women when they're seeking abortion is the stigma. There is so much stigma in our society for women who are undergoing abortion. A third of women will have an abortion during their lifetime. It is the most common surgical procedure. But yet there's still women who come and don't want to tell anyone. They don't want anyone to know that they're going to have an abortion. So when protesters stand in front of the hospital, they're not there to have their opinion heard. They can come down here and have their opinions heard. Their point of being there, the reason why they want to stand in front of the clinic is because they want those women to feel shame, they want those women to feel more stigmatized, and they want to harass those women. And their also intention is to intimidate people like me and the nurses that I work with so that we will feel uncomfortable providing this service. It is not about free speech. When they stand there in front of the hospital, that is not an act of protest, that is an act of violence. And that is why this law is important and will help women seeking abortion.
Thank you, Dr. Brooks. Ms. Gender?
Thank you so much for coming to speak today. I can tell in your voice and your words that that was not an easy decision, but you're doing a big service and we appreciate it. And my question for you is really, you mentioned, I mean, this bill is about reducing that shame and stigma, as you say, but we know, and I wonder if you could comment on the fact that although abortion is legal, there is still difficulty for folks across this province in accessing a full slate of reproductive health care to which they're entitled. Do you believe that this bill will assist in making that care more available?
Dr. Brooks.
Sorry. Yes, so everyone knows about the Women's Choice Clinic. For many years, that was the default place people would come when they wanted abortion. What people didn't know is that there were lots of people like myself around the province providing abortion. I did medical and surgical abortions, but I didn't want people to know about me because I didn't want people protesting. I had a private office. I didn't want people out there protesting. So, family doctors that I worked with knew I was there. So if, you were lucky enough to have one of those family doctors who knew that I was there providing abortion, then you could make it and you wouldn't have to travel to Nova Scotia or to Halifax for your abortion. But if that knowledge could be more publicly available, that these abortion providers exist in these communities, because I wouldn't have to worry about people protesting outside of my office or people calling my house or standing outside of my house because they didn't like what I was doing. And in small places like Truro, people know where you live, right? It's not like Halifax, you know where most of the doctors in your community live. So if people could feel more comfortable being public, then that would allow women to understand more who is actually providing in their community. And like I said, now with medical abortion, so previous to 2017, really the only option was surgical abortion, but now medical abortion is available, can be provided by family doctors in their office. So, if family doctors can feel comfortable that they can provide abortion, they're not going to have to worry about harassment, then it's going to encourage them certainly to undertake and to take that up as a service that they provide to their patients, and will go a long way to improving access for sure.
Ms. Regan.
And just for my colleagues, medical abortion, that is the mifegai-mizo, the abortion pill. Is that what you mean?
Dr. Brooks.
Yeah, so now in Canada, the main way we would do medical abortion is with mifegai-mizo. Prior to that, there were other medications you could use, but the majority would be mifegai-mizo now.
Any other questions? Thank you very much, Dr. Brooks. We really appreciate you coming in and sharing your expertise. Kevin Corbett. Hi, welcome, Mr. Corbett. The floor is yours.
Thanks. I'm going to save you most of these 10 minutes. My name is Kev Corbett. I've worked in the music sector locally, regionally, nationally, and internationally for 20 years now. As a side musician, a songwriter, instructor, festival staff, booker, board member, sound man, the list goes on. Like all of us, I owe everything I am to excellent women. I was raised by my mom and the circle of women around her, so it follows naturally that to the extent I have any friends at all, they tend to be female identifying. When I moved here, I began volunteering at Red Herring Books, Halifax's first alternative bookstore, because I had a creeping feeling, which turned out to be true, that I was very small town. And there I was hipped to social factors like misogyny and feminist response, homophobia and the pride movement's response, racism and the solidarity movement's response. It was around that time that I met my excellent partner and the profoundly ass-kicking quality of women with whom she regularly surrounds herself. It wasn't long after that that I was welcomed into the exceptional community of people at the Company House, an arts hub opened by and for women and allied and queer artists, and it is in grateful solidarity with them that I speak today. Now I'm going to get the hell out of the way and quote my excellent partner here. This is a piece from a blog post that she wrote in 2014, and it speaks to women being lectured to about how to deal with their lives. I would encourage anyone to read the full piece at stephaniedomet.com. The piece is called, "Now is the Time for All Good Men to Get Out of the Way If They Can't Lend a Hand," and this is an excerpt. It's from 2014, the week her former employer fired an abuser about whom women had warned each other for years. In it, she says, and I'm quoting, "As much as I've been heartened by the ability of people to change their point of view through discussion and careful consideration, I've been disheartened by the number of times this week I've been lectured to by men who ought to know better, who've had every opportunity to educate themselves and think critically. I've been lectured on equality and the need for it. I've been lectured on the suffocating culture of silence around sexual violence. I've been lectured on the necessity of letting the courts do their work. I've been lectured 6 ways from Sunday on issues I've been breathing like air and drinking like water since I was 6 years old. Men, it is time for you to shut up if you can't just be helpful. It is time for you to stop assuming that you know more about this than we do. Just stop it. Listen to us. Don't jump in and give us solutions as if we haven't thought of them, tried them, watched them fail, started again just in case we hadn't tried hard enough the first time. If the pace of social change on the issue of women's equality is too slow for you, well, we have that in common. Why don't you ask yourself why that pace is so slow instead of blaming women for not getting it done faster? We've been rolling this boulder up the hill for decades. It's time for you to help. And if you can't do that, get out of the goddamn way. Sit down and shut up. The women are talking. In solidarity with my mothers, my aunties, my cousins, my sisters, my partner, my niece, my friends, and colleagues, I say abortion is legal, and that women's access to health services should never be predicated upon whether or not they can beat their way through a line of scrimmage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Corbett. Any questions? Thank you very much for coming in. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Terrific. We'll circulate them around. Alex Stratford. Is Alex here? We're a little bit ahead, so Rebecca Faria.
Right.
And Kevin Payne? Okay, so be 11. The committee will recess for 15 and give some time to these folks that were scheduled for a little later. I'd like to call the committee back to order, and we'll resume with our witnesses. Next is Alex Stratford from the Nova Scotia College of Social Workers. And Mr. Stratford, thank you for coming in. The format here is up to 10 minutes with you at the table, 15 total. 10 minutes for presentation, although you may exceed that, and 5 minutes for questions. The balance of the time is for questions. Mr. Stratford, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'll try and be as succinct and clear as I can this morning. Our society must be trauma-focused and informed. I'm here today to speak to Bill number 242, Protecting Access to Reproductive Health Care. I'd like to start off by wishing everyone a happy Social Work Month. In the spirit of Social Work Month, I would like to invite you to think about healthcare as part of a dynamic system, one that includes individuals, families, communities, and institutions. It's also a system that includes policies, procedures, and processes. In the case of abortion care, those policies, procedures, and processes have been established in a long-fought battle for bodily autonomy and reproductive justice, and have manifested themselves into an abortion care system that we have today, institutionalized within our health authorities. It regulates the process for individuals seeking care and for the healthcare providers delivering that care. Today, we are here because we've identified a glaring gap. In the establishment of those policies and procedures, we've thought about individuals and we've thought about institutions. However, we have not paid attention to the community and the environment adjacent to those healthcare centers. Social work's founding principles are based on two premises. First, that the client is the expert of their own life. And second, that we work from a framework that stresses the importance of understanding an individual behavior in light of the environmental context in which that person lives and acts. We know as a profession that the environment where a person lives has a real impact on the access and delivery of quality care to clients by health professionals. It matters as much what happens outside the clinics as it does inside the clinics. The quality of medical care you receive is impacted by the community you're in. And quite frankly, based on the presentations here today, without bubble zones, that community we are in is not one that is safe. An abortion is a personal decision, and one that shouldn't be subject to judgment and harassment from complete strangers. We would not tolerate this for any other routine medical procedure. Imagine walking through a throng of anti-choicers, screaming at you, holding up signs of embryos on your way to get a vasectomy. This would never happen. It shouldn't be allowed in the first place. We all know that mental well-being is an essential component of a person's overall health. And we also know the deep and long-lasting impacts of trauma on individuals. It is essential that we protect people from the experience of being harassed, degraded, and vilified for seeking routine medical care. Furthermore, we have an imperative to also protect the very people who are providing this essential service. Healthy and meaningful workplaces are also essential to mental well-being, and our healthcare professionals deserve to go to and from work free from aggression and intimidation, just like everyone else. Social workers' values call on us to respect the inherent dignity and worth of all persons, to champion self-determination and confidentiality. I know our colleagues providing abortion care have established processes that ensure every person seeking abortion care is cared for with dignity, worth, confidentiality, and driven by self-determination. But the very fact that anti-choicers are allowed outside these spaces to bully, denigrate, and harm people seeking medical care actively undermines the very principles and philosophies that drive client and family-centered, trauma-informed care. Health professionals can't be expected to both build the boat, sail the boat, and protect the boat all at the same time. And in this case, the boat has been built and it's sailing, and it's up to the government to responsibly protect it. 1 year after the establishment of bubble zones around the second standalone abortion clinic in Alberta, Cecilia Pozniak, who is the executive director of the Kensington Clinic in Calgary, spoke about feelings of her staff and her patients feeling much more safe and secure in access of those services. It is with all that said that we must make sure that abortions are legal and safe. We must also think about safety in terms of accessing abortion services, not just in terms of the medical procedure of the abortion itself. As social workers, we very much support the passing of this act.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stratford. Any questions from the committee? Thank you very much. Oh, Ms. Roberts.
Just from the perspective of your association, do you have any other thoughts on what we could be doing as a provincial legislature to ensure that Nova Scotians can access their rights to reproductive health?
Mr. Stratford.
Yeah, it comes down to funding and access. We've got to make sure that the funding cuts that were taken away in the early 90s by the federal government is restored, 50-50 healthcare splits. We also have to make sure that people have proper mental health care, access to it, quality care, both in their communities and in our institutions, to make sure that we are continuing to deal with trauma, to understand trauma and its impacts. And we also have to make sure that all of our systems are thinking in terms of trauma-informed practice, are understanding the impacts that it has, the dynamics that it plays in healing and well-being, and making sure that it is at the forefront of the decisions, both policy and in treatment that we are providing when we are working with all populations.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Stratford, for coming in today. Appreciate it. Rebecca Faria. Good morning, Ms. Faria. Up to 10 minutes or a bit more for presentation, a total of 15 minutes in total. The floor is yours.
I came here today to add my voice to those in support of this bill. There is an ongoing conversation in Nova Scotia about what we owe to one another. These issues involve complex intersections of class, gender, race, and disability. There are many barriers to equity that compete for our attention and resources. But the one I'm here to address feels somehow unique. When I needed a root canal, there was nobody standing outside the dentist office to tell me I must have failed to floss effectively and I needed to endure dental pain as punishment. When my loved ones were taking their partners to chemotherapy, no one was waiting for them with a prayer circle, garish autopsy photos, and pamphlets to counsel them that choosing treatment would violate God's plans for the cancerous cells their bodies had created. I have never seen a busloads of Americans visit Halifax on an intercity tour and picket a pediatrician's office to try to prevent parents from accepting potentially life-saving vaccines for their children. Individually and collectively, humans do have a distressing tendency to pass judgment on each other, and misinformation continues to thrive in the internet age. But I cannot think of any other health matter that people organize to disrupt at the point of care in this way, other than sexual and reproductive health. Last year, I designed sticky notes with lists of key services for people dealing with unplanned pregnancy or sexualized violence and printed 100 notepads with the financial support of local community members and a nonprofit that provided funding. I gave them to friends around the city who put them in public bathrooms, on library shelves, in hotel Bibles, in comic book stores, and university hallways, but mostly on the transit ads of anti-abortion organizations so as to counter their messaging with an offer of actual resources. The best love letters I've ever written. 5,000 little notes around the city telling anyone who reads them that they deserve to decide what happens to their body. They deserve to ask for help when they need it, and the people around them deserve this too. I created these notes because I trust that most people are doing the best they can with what they have available. I just want them to have accurate information about their options, preferably well before they actually need it. And whether someone who becomes pregnant knows instantly what they are going to choose or agonizes about it for ages, whether they make their decisions alone or confer with loved ones, healthcare professionals, or leaders in their faith, I do not believe that I or anyone else should be interrupting them as they approach the hospital doors seeking time-sensitive care. This is not about a difference of faith or opinion. This is about human rights. Anti-choice protesters who target abortion providers and seekers are trying to maintain a climate of shame around sexual behavior and to reassert social control over other people's bodies. Whether they admit it or not, they are engaging in gender-based harassment in public spaces. Specifically, a type of targeted harassment that is designed to discourage access to sexual and reproductive health care for people who are or may become pregnant. In April of 2012, I volunteered to start a Halifax chapter of an international anti-harassment organization called Hollaback, and I coordinated that advocacy here for about 5 years. I was concerned by the way harassment shaped my access to public space, and I knew I wasn't alone. During those years, people trusted me with those personal stories about sexist, racist, ableist, transphobic, and homophobic harassment. They talked about how those experiences affected how they perceived their personal safety and their ability to move through public space, and their access to education, public transportation, housing, healthy and affordable food, employment, and recreation. They talked about the normalization of harassment and the difficulty of being believed or taken seriously when they needed help, which was sometimes worse than the harassment itself. And they talked about how all this affected their health and general well-being. I was honored to hold space for those stories and to be allowed to share some of them with the wider community. Limits to free expression can be tolerated as long as they are reasonable. And a 50-meter limit, less than a block away in an urban area to protect healthcare access, is entirely reasonable. Harassment, coercion, and stigma are far more likely to cause trauma than an ordinary medical procedure provided by competent professionals to an informed, consenting patient in a safe environment. I have found that being pro-abortion feels a little bit like being pro-root canal or pro-heart transplant. I do not want anyone I know to need those services, but when they do need them, I want the care to be there, and I don't want anyone standing in their way and treating their need for service as an opportunity to trap them in debate about their humanity. I am pro-abortion, pro-parenting, pro-healthcare, pro-choice. I am pro-free expression as long as that expression does not violate other necessary human rights and freedoms. I am all of these because I strongly believe in the primacy of bodily autonomy and consent. I didn't come here because I believe I should have to negotiate for these basic human rights. I should be able to join others in demanding them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Faria. I'm working on that name. Thank you. Ms. Roberts.
Thank you so much. And there are a number of things that you said that just framed in a really beautiful, eloquent way ideas that I've not grappled with adequately. And I really like how you described protests, pro-life protests near abortion providers as an attempt to reassert social control. I think that was it's a phrase I haven't heard before, and I'll remember it. And I also really appreciate your sort of loving and creative way of sharing information. And I guess my question is, it reminds me of some other sort of counter-protests that were also really based on messages of love and affirmation to all women. That happened a number of years ago around the Women's Choice Clinic. And I wonder if you'd just share, I guess why that is, I guess, a tactic that you resort to, like creativity and also in some ways real playfulness or art as a response.
Ms. Faria.
I think I choose these tactics because ultimately I don't expect to persuade someone with strong pro-life beliefs that they are wrong. That is a process that I hope will happen, but will take a very long time, and they are more likely to listen to the people closest to them. The people who I want to reach are those who are in need of care, who are unsure of how to access it, who are unsure of their rights to access, who are trying to navigate what seems like narrow options to make sure that as many doors are open as possible. And creative expressions are more likely to capture attention in a positive way than, I mean, there's a time and place for shouting on the street. I'm willing to do it when necessary, but it's not my preferred go-to tactic.
Any other questions? Thank you, Ms. Faria, for coming in today. Appreciate it. Has Kevin Payne arrived? Terrific. Welcome, Mr. Payne. 10 minutes for presentation, 5 minutes for questions. The floor is yours.
Thank you for allowing me to come in. It's the first time in this building. It's a very beautiful spot. I'll keep it pretty brief. I don't come here with any kind of official capacity in terms of social work, but I'm quite confident in saying that I don't believe that people should be in any way felt uncomfortable to access what I believe are basic health services. We have this type of legislation in 5 provinces in this country. I would like for Nova Scotia not to be the last. To me, it just makes sense to me that somebody should be able to make what is a difficult decision, a decision that I won't have to make, and I hope I don't have to help anybody make it unless they ask me to. But I think that if we can determine that people can't smoke a cigarette outside of a door, then we can determine that people can't have the right not to be re-traumatized or harassed to meet what the previous speakers had likened to getting dental work done. This is life-saving. This is personal. This can be economic for somebody. And I've seen how toxic these types of actions can be in other provinces in this country. In Ontario, I believe they enacted theirs in 2017. Where I grew up in London, Ontario, there would routinely be interactions and sometimes physical interactions with people. And that to me was quite sickening and toxic. I think that this is the right thing to do. I do not believe, while I respect the right of somebody to disagree with the services being rendered, I do not believe that stating that they can't be within a certain distance of a clinic infringes on their ability to make their speech heard. I especially don't believe that their right is trumps anybody else's right to gain access to health care. So that's it.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Payne. Any questions for Mr. Payne? Thank you for coming in. Appreciate it. Okay, so just for committee members' knowledge here, you should have before you actually 2 written submissions, one from Tabitha Ewart and also from Maureen McQuaid. There's also one from Sherry Bain on Bill 243 for your information, and certainly for anyone else that wishes to have their voice heard, there's an opportunity to write your individual MLA as the bill proceeds through the last 2 stages of the House, and if, as another option, I'd like to offer up that if you want to reach all the MLAs, please write the Ledge Council office by tonight, and we'll have that circulated to all the members of the legislature. And there's one on Bill 243. Another written submission on Bill 243 arriving as I speak from Jody Watt. So looking for a motion for referral, Ms. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move Bill 242, Protecting Access to Reproductive Health Care Act, be moved to the legislature without amendment.
Any further discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Motion is carried. That concludes our business here today. We're adjourned. Thank you very much.